Welcome to another episode of Corporate CPR, where we breathe life back into your organization, projects, and processes, giving you insights to recovery and avoiding corporate mortality events. Today, we'll be talking about how executive loneliness might be killing your company, and joining us to contribute to the conversation is Nick Johnson. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you so much for the warm invitation, Jana. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we're glad you're here. Can you share a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so I was born in Sweden, educated in Australia, and then I lived and worked the last 20 years in Southeast Asia, working my way up the corporate ladder until I found myself pretty isolated at the top as a managing director in a big firm. I resigned from the job. With that hit a bit of a personal crisis, but out of there I rebuilt my life, and now I'm a happy entrepreneur, running confidential peer groups, supporting entrepreneurs and also senior executives where they can discuss the work-related challenges and how to overcome them.
Yeah, well, great. Well, let's just dive right in then. How pervasive of an issue do you think, executive loneliness is?
It's bigger than we can imagine, and I did a lot of research when I wrote my book, but I also did my personal interviews and surveys and so on. And no matter which surveys you look at, and even my interview aligned with it, and it's about 30 to 33% of senior executives that find themselves isolated or having feelings of isolation in the workplace. So it's obviously highlights that about one of three are walking around feeling a bit isolated and lonely at the top, as we say.
And so what are some of, I guess, the causes of that then?
Well, we live in a world where society set us up for success. Perhaps as children, first our parents are driving us, hoping we get scholarships and become good students so we can get a good job that pay well. And then after that, we have bosses driving us with KPIs. It's even more competitive in the workplace, and the good get rewarded, the underperformers get let go. And there's no wonder then that we sort of create this jealousy culture where everyone is striving for success, stepping on the toes of each other. And I fell into that. And even I remember at university, I got a big kick of getting the scholarships and topping classes, because before I hit university, I was very mediocre. I started then finally to get a taste for success. And at work, I wanted more of that. I cared much more about getting my own bonuses, promotions, impressing the bosses than the well-being of my colleagues. What I didn't realize that being on that path was self-destructive, because once I achieved everything I wanted and had, then I wasn't happy there.
What about, how much do you think people feel isolated because they don't have people that can relate to them? I mean, I know even in my peer group, right? So I'm an entrepreneur, but we have an organization that has, 80 plus people. So that's a very different conversation than when I'm talking to my solopreneur friends, right? The problems I'm dealing with aren't the same problems that they're dealing with. So how much do you think that plays into executive loneliness?
It's a big factor, and I'm speaking a lot about both having personal safe spaces, professional safe spaces, and on the professional side, it is internally in your company and externally. And some people will say, well, I cannot speak about anything in my company. There's no one I can talk to. I don't have anyone at my level. I cannot go to my team. I'm trying to motivate them to do the job, and I cannot open up to my HR. Maybe I won't get the next promotion, and opening up to my boss about this would be career suicide. So that would be some of the common excuses. And what we need to do instead is to take self-ownership of that and look for these safe spaces externally. Then there are coaches we can work with. There are mentors we can work with. There are mentoring organizations where you also can give back. You can sign up and become a mentor some more junior than you. And in return, you can get a more senior sponsor who's there, a sponsor or mentor to help you. So there's so many things you can do, and also masterminds. And then we have the peer groups, which is what I do. And I like what you said, because an organization with 80 staff is different from a solopreneur, and yet again, someone who's driving a large organization and with thousands. So that's the first thing we do. When someone is joining our peer network, we have a one-on-one conversations where we ask them all these questions. How many team members? Do you have P&L responsibility and so on? And then we find a group with a like-minded, and we even go over and the kind of group with them, the group DNA is set, and then we check in to make sure they find a group where the conversation is relevant to them and the maximum value. So that's what we can do if we cannot have these conversations internally. There's still things we can do internally, and we can discuss that, but I'm a big believer that we need to be proactive about this and find it externally.
What do you think the impact to both the individual and the organization are if a person doesn't recognize that maybe they have this problem, and then, or maybe they just don't recognize that it is a problem. Maybe they just accept that that's the way it is. Is there any downside to that, or what are your
Yes.
observations there?
Yeah, it's a downside at both end, right? It's a downside of the person who's feeling isolated in the workplace because they obviously going to walk around with a lot of anxiety. And if this continues, as in my case, then you might hit the depression even. Because if you don't discuss this, you don't deal with it, then it's just going to bundle up for the organization. It means that you have someone in the organization who's not going to speak up when there's some small challenges or big challenges or issues or mistakes happening because they are scared. If you have those feelings of being closed, then you're worried that if I say this, maybe I'll be judged, maybe I get terminated. There's all these fears coming in, especially with the workplace as it is now. People are already scared. They know that they're not as safe in the company as they used to be. So adding then this on with the isolation, that just multiplies this. And that again, also what happened to me. I walked around with anxiety the last year in the work to the point where I felt that it's better I resign myself rather than the company find out that I made these mistakes and they terminate me. And the issue here was that it was not big mistake. It was some small mistakes I done. But when you play that in your own head over a year, it becomes something that is bigger than it should be.
Hmm. Well, so you mentioned obviously peer groups and organized peer groups as well as coaching, but are there other ways that you also recommend for leaders to if they are feeling that loneliness, what else they can do to combat it?
It depends on what level it is, and it's better to be proactive. And I talk a lot about practicing our vulnerability muscle, just like we go to the gym and lift weights. It's the same with vulnerability and talking about our challenges. So if you have friends you can trust, then a few is good enough, even if it's one or two or three that you can start to share some challenges with. And then perhaps you can ask your friend, do they have a few friends also? Then you can set up a small group where with like-minded, and that's what I done. I also run a men's group. We just get on Zoom 1 hour per week, and every week we have a different topic, and we just go around the room, and we're about 9 to 11 of us who share for a few minutes each on the topic. And again, just to have this safe space where we feel we can discuss, we can voice some of the challenges that are going through in our life. And this is something that doesn't have to cost money, as long as you have some people in your life. If you don't have those people who you feel you can trust in your life, there's a lot of volunteer organizations, as I mentioned, mentoring organizations and so on. And the world of charities is full of the people who are there to give back. And that's a good space also to find some mentors.
Um, do you think that there's leaders within companies maybe who are comfortable being vulnerable could get to the point where they're too vulnerable and maybe oversharing within their own company? Or I mean, what are your thoughts about how much of that deep diving, I guess, you should be doing with maybe your peers or even the people who report to you?
Yeah, so we need to be very careful here with oversharing in the company, because it could indeed backfire. It could start gossiping, and it might make you feel even more isolated if you're the talk of the month by the water cooler. So just be a bit careful. And I always say it's better to discuss these matters in your safe space, which you have been proactive to build up externally, and then check for your opinion. If there's something big on my mind, I will normally check in with one of my mentors. I say, I had this issue. I think I'm going to go to HR, my boss, to discuss this. This is what I'm going to say. What do you think? So you get a second opinion. Sleep on it. Don't rush. Don't, as soon as a crisis hits, when emotions are high, start oversharing. but be quite strategic about it. And then it's normally well received. But what I done is I open up with my team, and it doesn't have to be that we open up about company challenges. We all have personal challenges as well. I have a teenage son, and many people can recognize themselves when we speak about our children and how we do that. We can relate that back to the workplace. So it's about building a bond, being human, and connecting at different levels. And then we just need to be careful what we share so that people don't start judging you.
Mm. How much should or maybe I have to say it this way, what ways have you seen organizations maybe being proactive in helping their senior leaders through these types of things?
Yeah, so that's what I do also myself outside the peer group, and one way is, for example, you get someone who can come in. There's a lot of speakers on this, and I do workshops on this. I come into the company and I basically share and open up the conversation and humanize and break down the barriers and the culture for them. And I do then workshops with the leadership team and encourage them and give them the tools, because many leaders don't know how to do this, and especially if you're a senior leader, and many of the young recruits that are coming in now, they cannot really connect, and it's about how do you break down those barriers, and rather than start trying to drive them hard, it's about being human first and connecting at the human level and so on. But people can do that by having team building events and doing things outside the workplace as well, rather than just being inside the workplace. The world is so fast moving now. We are so driven that we just need to take a step back from time to time. That would be my advice.
No. Are there things that you see, I guess, taking this further into how how this facilitates healthy teams? And maybe, I don't know, maybe there isn't a connection, but I'm just wondering, kind of if you're centered in doing well, then how that can extend to your team.
Yeah, and I'm a big believer that everything we discuss now needs to start from the top, and ideally this means that right at the top of an organization, but it can also start in a team if you're a team leader. And if you're the number two in a team, perhaps you can influence your boss and you can do this together. But we cannot really expect fresh graduates coming in a company and start opening up and driving this. So we need to take ownership. And I know that perhaps the generation, my generation and plus, we naturally don't have this in us. But the new and the younger generation, they expect this from us. Because they are so open themselves. Many of them, they born and raised with social media, where you perhaps, according to us, overshare. But that's what they want. They want to see humans. They want to know who we are. Gone are the days with that powerful, strong boss and leader who leading with a firm fist. That just doesn't work. And I keep hearing this every day. So we need to be very mindful and taking on this more human approach instead as leaders, and proactively learn this. And there's so many books you can read about vulnerable leaderships and the power of connection and the power of vulnerability with Brené Brown is out there. Those are all great tools for a leader to start with.
One of the observations I feel I've noticed a little bit more recently is it feels like resilience is going down. Right. A lot more, it feels there's a lot more victim, like, rather than this is life, just deal with it and move on, and I guess, you think about, baby boomers and stuff, and maybe they were a little too resilient because maybe they bore it all on their shoulders, but then you have maybe some generations who quite aren't resilient enough. I mean, what are your thoughts there around how this might be playing out from a generation's perspective?
Yeah, and I keep hearing this so frequently, and I think you said it absolutely right. And what a huge difference then from one extreme to the other extreme. It's very, very tricky there. I think we just have to not judge each other. We just have to accept that that's how it is. The world has evolved, and it's nothing we can do about that. Let's just bring it back to, again, being human, connecting at a different level, and having human conversations. I'm very, very open with my team, and I start this already from the first job interview, for example, where I share a few pages of my book. When in those pages I describe in quite detail when I really had the most difficult time of my life. That sets the scene for me being open, vulnerable as a leader. They connect with me as a human being. And I even have people coming into the first job interview to say, I read those pages, and by the way, I had a similar experience. This happened in one of my, when I was at school, at workplace, and they are sharing with me perhaps their biggest challenge already at the job interview. And if you start at that level, you're already connecting with them and before they join the company. And I, as much as when we have our team meeting town halls, I will share with the team if I've gone through something difficult, if something happened with my parents or in my family. I would open up by saying, I hope you had some good time. And by the way, this has gone through in my life. This is how I'm dealing with it. I just wanted you to know that I'm okay. And thanks for all the support during this. Then again, you normalize this, you humanize it, rather than looking at, that I'm not resilient or I'm resilient and so on. Let's just get on with it and accept for what is.
Well, but getting on with it, there's an element of resilience there. I mean, I guess, I do appreciate the comment of understanding that everybody's different and deal with situations differently. But as a characteristic, just like being brave is a good characteristic, I think there's definitely things that if people aren't resilient, that they should look to be like to grow in that area if they can, right? Or if I'm impatient, right? Like I need to look to grow to be more patient, because patience, there's value in that in certain ways, right? Every good thing can be overused and then become a bad thing as well. But I guess that's where I'm just wondering if there's something to be taught to leaders about how, like, some of that grit and resilience and bouncing back when things are tough.
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe, again, leading by example is a good way of
Mm-hmm.
doing it. And for myself, I live and train in an Ironman training camp. I'm the number 2% triathlete in the world. My team see this. I share this all the time, and they follow me. Many of the staff, they see I'm up running, cycling, and it doesn't matter what weather it
Mm,
is. I'm out there being resilient. And I
mm.
don't have to say it. They see it. Okay, this guy is out there in rainstorm, and it doesn't matter. And I'm always there for them. And we have even set up running groups. We have in the cities that we operate, and I meet with the team, and we go out and do these kind of things together if they want to come along. So that's my way of showing it in my organization.
Oh yeah, no, that's great. And it's funny because I read David Goggins' book not too long ago, and I had never heard of him before. I can't remember. I think another podcaster or something recommended the book, and I read it, and yeah, like he does a lot of those Iron Man type things. And that's what I always think about when I'm not being resilient. Like, wasn't what this guy went through. I should be able to get through more than what I'm going through right now.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, as I said, my team all know my history. They know that I went through
Mm,
difficult times. I'm sharing when things are happening during the pandemic. For example, I lived in Singapore. My son, a teenage son, was with my ex-wife in Sweden, isolated. We couldn't travel to see. When I went to see him 3 times during that time, I had to spend 2 weeks in quarantine, coming back every time, not in my place, but in an institution. So
mm,
that was the price I paid. I communicated all about this clearly, and uh, and then adding the sport to that, living and breathing my values and what I do. That's again my way to demonstrate to them, and this is me being resilient, and then encouraging them all the time also to live their life and whatever they like. I'm not trying to tell them to do triathlons, but whatever it is that they connect with, do that. And I think we have created this culture of resilience because they have many other athletes who actually been attracted to this culture, open culture,
mm.
where we and that have joined.
Yeah. People shouldn't underestimate the quarantine stuff. I had to do hotel quarantine twice. Going back, and it's funny you mentioned Australia. I spend quite a bit of my time there, and so be able to go back to Australia where my husband was. I had to go do 2 weeks of quarantine twice,
Yeah,
so
we know it.
it was not a fun time. Um, cool. Well, when you think about how to kind of like what qualities really go into a leader who then maybe isn't isolated, what are some of those, I guess, characteristics that stand out to you in your mind then of a leader who's thriving and who isn't feeling isolated and isn't feeling lonely?
I think empathy comes very high up on the list for how you need to
Mm,
be as a leader today. I think, again, the old leader there being perhaps too directive, too powerful, uh, having that empathy, that is where the connection starts, because people will start
mm,
feeling safe with you, feeling comfortable with you, and start perhaps, sharing what's on their mind. And then don't judge them and give them that moment. And being a good listener perhaps is more important than ever. And this links into what I myself believe in very much now, also being a coach. I have educated myself the last couple of years to be a coach myself. Now I'm encouraging my other leaders in the organization to become coaches and sponsoring them to join coaching. So we're creating a coaching culture where it's not about so much delegating and telling others to do, but rather asking questions so that other people take ownership for it themselves. And linking this back to the topic we discussed before, there's no better way than creating a culture and bridging the gap between the younger generation and the leaders than by instead asking them coaching questions. And then you're also forming this resilient culture because they have the ownership and they're doing it their way rather than the way that we presented it to them.
um do you have recommendations then when if a leader is looking out to get more connected? You've already mentioned all sorts of different avenues to do that. Do you have guidance on how somebody could reflect on who they who they are as a person and what avenue might be the most effective for them?
Yeah, I think it's wonderful for anyone to take a step back there and perhaps reflect on their purpose in life and think about what is it really that they want to do. Think back on the hobbies and things that we did when we were a child. What made you happy as a child? For example, I went through this journey in the last year with John Mattone, the coach of Steve Jobs, and I was asked to look back at photo albums, talking to my parents, and it became very, very obvious that every picture as a child I was out cycling. So then I was thinking, no wonder I love cycling so much now. So I brought back that hobby, that love for cycling in my life, and I'm doubling down on that. And it made a huge difference in my life. So I would recommend everyone to first think, what is it that make you happy? Don't sign up for clubs or associations and go out and connect in places where you don't want to be. I, for example, don't like to be in the gym. So every time I sign up
Mm,
for a gym membership, after a few sessions, I wasted the money. So I shouldn't push myself or force myself to go to gym. If I like
mm,
cycling, then I should do that instead, for example. And then there's wonderful cycling communities, cycling clubs, organizations. So that's why I double down on that. And if you like badminton or bowling or whatever it is, perhaps you did as a teenager and you
mm,
stopped it because life came in the way, look up those old hobbies and join those clubs, associations, and connect with like-minded there. Share the memories from your youth with them and become younger again and have this young heart. And then you will naturally feel at place and build your own tribe.
mm. Do you think points, and maybe you even have some personal experience where there's that feeling of hopelessness, and I know that when we have that feeling of hopelessness, sometimes it's hard to even figure out what the next step is to take. So do you have advice for people who might be experiencing that?
Yes, and that's where I was before, and I'm also now coaching senior executives, and there's some who can go through that journey, which I just described. Otherwise, finding your purpose, finding your hobbies. But if there's too much pain there, if there's a burnout, if there's depression, if there's some form of addictions, then they tend to override this and block that, and the people will not be able to break through. inside themselves to find it. And in fact, they will maybe break down and start crying if you ask them then about these matters, because they just will not be able to access it. And then simply if people need help, and I was there, I went to help. And there's so many support groups for that as well. There's mental health support groups. There's 12-step programs for everything from shopping addiction to gambling to alcohol to drugs. So if someone has any issues, it's about admitting that to yourself and take ownership for that and address it. There's also hotlines and volunteer organizations where you can get help. There's therapists, there's counseling and so on. So probably have some session to address what that is. And then after that, move into the wonderful journey of self-discovery with a purpose.
And the answer is probably self-evident, but have you seen that after people put in this type of work, does their performance increase?
Yes, absolutely, because it's a self-growth journey. It starts from internally, and people just start to blossom like perhaps they never done before. They will be a shining light, and they can't stop talking about it, about their transformation, but hopefully also passing on the gift to others, to other team members, to family members, and to the society. And those are the people I'm connected with today, and that's the space I want to be in.
Awesome. Well, Nick, this has been a really fascinating conversation. What 3 things do you want to leave top of mind with people?
Yeah, I would encourage everyone to think of vulnerability indeed as a muscle and keep practicing it in your safe spaces. That would be my first one. My second one would be, if you don't have any safe spaces, I would encourage everyone to proactively go out and find them. You need at least a safe space professionally where you can speak with like-minded about your work. And you need some personal safe space where you can talk about your personal lives and relationships. And that's the second. And thirdly, I would say, if there's something on your mind, if there's something that is giving you that pain, perhaps you're waking up in the middle of the night because there's some pain there, some worry, anxiety, I would encourage everyone to journal that, write it down with some clarity, and then think about, who can I give a call today to discuss through this and ask for help. And that could be anything from a hotline to a friend, to a mentor or sponsor, and just take action on that today. That would be my 3 recommendations.
Well, I'd love to pause for a moment on that third one then and just ask you, because it didn't come up, about do you have any tips for journaling then, or approaches to that?
All of my desk is just packed with the Post-it notes everywhere I go. Also next to my bed table, on my phone, I have a note taker. As soon as something comes to my mind, even if it's painful or positive or whatever it is, I just write it down, let it sit there for a while, and I try to not ignore it before I go to bed. I deal with it as a go over my inventory in the evening before night, and just deal with all the things so that I can go to bed knowing that everything will be okay.
Awesome. Well, fantastic. And Nick, how can folks find out more about what you do or get in contact with you?
Yeah, they can look up on Amazon. My book is there, Executive Loneliness. It's available as a Kindle book also there, and an audiobook. And then finally, if someone want to see the rest of our work, then it's my website, which is nickjohnson.com, and it's spelled NickJonsson.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being on our show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And to our audience, until next time, keep your organizations healthy.